Okay, Matthew chapter 14 tells the story of two very famous miracles, definitely Sunday school top 10 kind of miracles. And the one is the feeding of the 5,000 with just a few fish and 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. And then the second one is when Jesus walks on the water out to the boat and Peter comes out to him. So those are two very famous miracles. But as I was reading this, those are the kind of miracles that feel totally unattainable to me, right? Like, I do not believe that ever in my walk with Jesus will I ever walk on the water. And I'm not convinced that I'll ever be able to multiply food the way that Jesus did. I totally aspire to see someone raised from the dead. I totally aspire to see many amazing, miraculous healings. I don't even aspire to these two miracles. They're so big. But I realize there's a third miracle here in Matthew chapter 14 that not only can I aspire to, but it's something that I can do every day, that I need to do every day, but that I think is just as miraculous in its own way. And the clue to this third miracle starts at the beginning of Matthew chapter 14, verses 1 through 12, talks about the beheading of John the Baptist. And it tells us that John's disciples, as soon as they recovered the beheaded body of John, buried it. It says, then they went and told Jesus. So right before Jesus feeds the 5,000, he learns that his friend, his partner in ministry, John the Baptist, has been killed. And we can tell he's upset and he's distraught because in verse 13 it says, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. We already know by this point that Jesus is a little weary. He's a little frustrated. He's a little disappointed in the people. And then he learns that his partner in ministry has been killed, and he intentionally leaves to go and to be alone. But he doesn't get to be alone because in that next little section, it says, hearing of this, that Jesus had gone to this solitary place, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. And so that when Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd. And he had compassion on them, and he healed their sick. So to me, that's miraculous. He went off to be alone. He was exhausted from the people. He was maybe a little irritated with the people, and he was grieving a very personal and real grief, maybe even aware that like this terrible death that John the Baptist had died was a foreshadowing of the death that Jesus was himself going to die, and he needed some time to process that, but he didn't get the time because immediately a crowd comes, but he doesn't dismiss them. He has compassion on them, and he begins to heal them, and he spends the time with them. So then he stays there all day, and it says, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, this is a remote place, which we remember was on purpose. It was remote on purpose because he wanted to be away from the villages and away from the people. The disciples said to him, it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. And if it's me and I'm grieving and I'm upset and I just want to be alone and I've been bombarded with people and some people say, you know what, just send them off, tell them you're done so that they can go get some food, I would say, yes, thank you, great idea. Send them away, let them all get food. Enough's enough, we'll start again tomorrow. I need some time for me. But that's not what Jesus does. Instead, he says in verse 16, they do not need to go away. You give them something to eat. And then the disciples come back and say, we can't. Basically, we don't have enough food. And that's when Jesus multiplies the food. He multiplies the food for a crowd of people who are interrupting his time to grieve the death of his friend, to process his own sacrifice that's coming quickly. He multiplies food to let people stay and continue to interrupt him. Even when it's time to go, he stays behind and he sends his disciples on. He says, you guys go ahead. And Jesus is the one who stays to dismiss the crowd. He lingers with them. Jesus is showing us in this what it is to have a life that's completely laid down. He's sacrificing, he's suffering. He's in the middle of suffering and he continues to engage with the people. And that's miraculous. It's miraculous that he doesn't take the many different options available to him to go and be alone. He doesn't take any of the outs that he's been given. He stays and he lingers with the people. He stays behind and he dismisses the crowd himself, and then he goes for a little bit to pray, but only once the crowds have completely been dismissed. So that was miraculous to me, because when I'm tired and I'm exhausted and I'm done, I try to find a way to be done. And when Jesus was tired and exhausted and grieving and mourning, he didn't try to find a way to be done. He kept engaging. He stayed present with the people. He continued his ministry because he saw their needs, and he saw that their needs were greater than his own even in that moment. Or maybe they weren't greater, but it didn't matter because he laid his needs down and he attended to the needs of the people. Okay, so tell me what struck you in Matthew chapter 14 in the comments, and read Matthew chapter 15 in preparation for tomorrow.